Welcome to the Workplace Wellbeing Essential Series. I'm Mari Ryan. I'm the CEO and founder of Advancing Wellness. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this expert interview where we explore topics that impact employee well-being. My guest today is Stefanie Heiter. Stefanie is the founder and partner of Bridging Distance and has helped pioneer the field of dispersed teaming and leadership since 1997. Stefanie is among the nation's leading thinkers and consultants on the human side of virtual work. She's authored numerous published articles in the area of virtual leadership, teams, and communication, and created 6 training workshops. Stefanie has earned a Master's of Science in Organization and Management from Antioch University, where her thesis focused on trust and communications in virtual teams, and a bachelor's degree in psychology from Clark University. When not consulting or conducting research, Stefanie enjoys hiking, photography, canoeing, and biking. Stefanie, welcome. I am so excited to have you here today.
Thanks, Mari. I'm so glad to be here as well. I'm very excited to be able to share some information and hopefully help the audience to experience better remote work.
Fabulous. Well, let's dig into our topic of remote working. In the digital world in which we live, businesses are increasingly dealing with the challenge of managing a distributed work team. And employers are moving towards policies that allow for more flexible work. And that's not just the hours people work, that can be from where they work. So I'm curious, what's the motivation for businesses to offer flexible work policies that include remote working?
So it is multifold. I would say, however, the primary one right now is the ability to attract and retain incoming talent. So it is looking at a new generation, so not just millennials who are looking for more flexible work arrangements, work-life integration, opportunities to be able to contribute in different ways, but we have the emerging Gen Z, which consists of digital natives who really can't understand or fathom a world where they're not connected to devices. So the ability for them to say, I have to come into a brick and mortar building or space doesn't make any sense because they have been raised and weaned on technology as a way of connecting. So that's one, and I think that's the primary one that people talk about. I think some of it is also access to resources when you need them. So if you think about companies, large and small organizations wanting to be more agile, which is a really big thing right now. So agile has moved beyond, capital A in terms of software development to the small a around agility. The ability to access resources as you need them, when you need them, really becomes critical for success and innovation with competition, small companies, large companies, that become really important. I think a couple of smaller factors as well that we still see. One is the idea of not just work-life integration, but being able to balance and take care of things you want, not just for the younger folks, but for folks as seasoned as I am around wanting to have more than just work and looking how to do all of that. And it's not a work-life balance question anymore. Really, it's a work-life integration.
And that certainly speaks to the desire for well-being that so many employees want. And this is just one element of that well-being.
That's right. That's 100% right. And the ability to then say, I'm going to work from home allows me that flexibility, allows me to focus and be productive at my peak hours and at my peak time and not be distracted. So here in New England, we recently had a snowstorm, and yes, it was on the weekend, but I think so many times where the pending snow has really had a profound impact on productivity for a few hours because people are worried about their children getting home, or are they going to be able to get home, trying to finish up a meeting. And so that flexibility, even in short pockets as opposed to a larger segment, becomes really critical for people to have longer term and shorter term pockets of productivity. And that's really what it's about, right? It's about getting results.
Exactly.
So,
It's all about the results. Exactly. You're doing a lot of research in this area, and I'm curious, what are the trends and what is your research revealing about remote working?
so there are a number of trends. The majority of them say that remote work will only increase in
Mhm.
2019 beyond. And in particular, as in 2020, many Gen Zs are going to be entering the workforce, and that's going to drive a demand for remote work and flexibility. But some of the trends we're seeing really are that companies have a higher expectation for digital skills and technological competence. So it used to be that there was some tolerance for people around, wait, I got to get this video thing down. I have to be able to figure out how do I access my email from my device, from my tablet. Now, one of the things we're seeing is that companies have an expectation of technological competence
Mm.
from the beginning, and not just for entry level, but as companies move and migrate towards that. So that's one. I think some of the other trends we're seeing around people being able to manage the company expectations um, for those skills. So being able to articulate what the expectations are so that they can be productive. And that means that we're seeing on our end an increase in the kinds of training and resources that companies are providing for their employees. So it is an increase in kind of consumables. So learning that you can do when you want to. So that's online training, but also still instructor-led training so that people can have those interactions so they can foster
Mm.
that. A couple of other trends. I think that we're seeing more and more smaller companies are more quickly and easily moving towards remote work and embracing that. But we also see pockets of larger companies, almost regardless of what their remote work policy is, we see small pockets within those companies actually still embracing remote work and allowing people to have flexibility. So those are a couple of them. Another one is this idea of um, kind of having remote workers instead of working, 5 days a week or the entire time in a home office or remotely. They're coming back into the workplace, so maybe 1 day a week,
Mm.
or 1 week a month, or 1 week for the quarter, depending on
Mm.
how far they're having to travel. But it's a bit like kind of the backsourcing that took place years ago with outsourcing, and then people brought back some of the jobs onshore. And so it's this idea of people being able to create those in-person relationships that really help with, with the communications and the ability to get things done.
Mm.
So
That's great. All right,
yeah.
good trends. Well, it's interesting. One of the trends that I'm hearing more about is kind of the reverse of this. Organizations that were early adopters on remote working and, sending their workforce home, if you will, are now reversing those policies and bringing people back in-house. Why do you think that is?
So for a couple of reasons, I think primarily what larger companies are finding is that people's ability to collaborate and have those kind of productive relationships that they have in person are lacking
Hmm.
when people are working remotely. And so they need most of the reasons that we come across are really stemming from that lack of interpersonal or human connection that's missing.
Hmm.
So we see that they have great tools. So they've embraced Office 365, or they have Drive, or they use Slack, et cetera, all kinds of technological solutions, but
Mhm.
it's still people who have to be
Hmm.
motivated to engage with each other via those technologies in order to make it work. So one of the things that we know, and our research continues to say, is that technology dehumanizes a relationship. So instead of being Mari, you are Mari at something, and so you are a digital soul to me. And it's really important to have ways in which you can rehumanize those relationships. So I'm working with Mari, and it's great fun, and we've had some great interactions, and therefore that motivation intrinsically has me more motivated to do the things that you need to do in order to be successful. So it creates that deeper sense of camaraderie and belonging and human connection that's missing. So that becomes really important. And I think that we see that companies are wanting that connection for people and feeling like what's missing then is that human connection. So therefore, what's lost is not just productivity, but agility and innovation, excuse me, and innovation and the ability really to connect and brainstorm and have some of that, in a lot of ways, that adhocracy, so that as needed, just in time kind of interaction that says a hallway conversation or some of the other ones. And so that's what we're hearing as reasons for people to come together. But I would still say you can create those kind of relationships using the technology as long as it's done well. So that's sort of what we're hearing around reasons to go the other way.
Pull people back in. Yeah. So it's very interesting because connection is a core part of well-being and those relationships we have and the sense of belonging. How can we foster that sense of belonging in the workplace when teams are working remotely?
So I live and die by the principle that it's all about trust, and you have to create trusting relationships. So starting with those basic aspects of trust building that we usually do in in-person environments and used to be such a core piece of doing business, but has gone away. And so we talk about two kinds of trust, and this comes back to earlier referenced my master's thesis on trust in virtual global teams. And what I found in that research that continues to resonate today is that there are two kinds of trust that we're thinking about. The first is what we call relational trust. And that's trust that's built on what we have in common. It's trust that's built on our common experiences of each other. So as females, as people living in the Northeast of the US, as white women, all those different things, the experiences that we have reinforce and amplify the trust we have for each other. And that is easy to do consciously and unconsciously in an in-person environment. The other kind of trust is called transactional trust. And transactional trust is trust that develops based on the way we execute on our tasks and the expectations others have of us to perform. So that means, are we delivering our tasks on time, as expected, with the quality of expected, to the right people, and asking for what we need in order to do that. And so that also has to do with, are we replying to emails? Are we participating in conference calls? So are we able, from a transactional task execution perspective, to add value to the overall mission of the team or the organization? And so that happens most often first in virtual environments. So in a distributed team, in remote work, we tend to judge people first by the way in which they complete their commitments and the way in which they communicate with us and the sense that they're actually being kind of responsible and responsive with that. And then from that, you can then move towards adding in the relational trust pieces, like doing virtual team building sessions and ways in which people can get to know each other. So, for example, in our team, we always have, we open our meetings, we use video, and we open our meetings with a check-in question. So it might be, how much snow did you have? What temperature is it outside for you? What's your favorite this? So, really questions that just get people to know each other, favorite color, vacation spot, of a whole list of 50 different things that you can do. That helps us get to know each other and goes back to rehumanizing our relationships so that we're motivated to work together. So that becomes a core piece of what we're doing around that trust building. And it's something that we talk about, making the informal formal. So how do you take all of the culture and the things that are in the air in an in-person environment that people just know, formalize them so that those interactions can be really founded on the same kinds of things. So that's one piece that we really begin to do with that. A couple of other ones is really also understanding how people come across. So we have this idea of what we call electronic body language. And kind of going back to some of the research that we've done, Electronic body language is the assumptions that you make about others and they make about you based on what we call your digital footprint or your digital presence. So
Hmm.
how do you show up for people electronically, right? So do you respond on time? And now we have so many places we show up. So even in a corporate setting, you're going to have your LinkedIn page. You're going to have your, you're going to show up on Skype for business. You're going to have this photo and that photo. And so are your presence aligned? So is your in-person reputation and presence the same as your digital one? Because we want to make sure that we're bringing some consistency across how we show up, but also how we perform. And what happens in our research, we have found that people will actually tend to read negativity into people's inconsistent digital habits, as well as things that they can't understand. If they don't understand the communication or they don't know the person, they would tend to read negative. So that's that transactional and relational trust building needs to coincide with that.
So very interesting. I actually see some of this with one of my clients. I'm on their internal systems because I've, in a long-term relationship with them. And I noticed when I started getting online that Skype is one of the, online tools that they use. And I put my photo in and, did all that little stuff. And I noticed how many people didn't have their photos, even, just as a way of being present and showing that they're engaging on this platform. And it's very clear to me that this move to more remote working kinds of things is something that's very new for this organization. They're used to the in-person, face-to-face types of situations. And even little things like not putting your photo on can be a message.
Yes, and what's interesting is we find that people who are the ones who are remote workers, who are the ones who are outside of the hub or wherever that central workplace is, are much more compelled to have a solid digital presence and to work harder on those relationships because they have to find that information.
Yeah. That makes perfect sense. So that leads me to a question about what are some of the challenges of creating and managing, remote and virtual teams?
So I would say that the biggest one is, so we have this this concept called the distance lens, and it looks at 4 types of distance that teams and organizations need to overcome in order to be successful. The first is called interpersonal distance, and that's distance as created in terms of differences in who we are as people. And that's gender, culture, these aspects to it that come into play. The second is organizational distance, which is distance and differences in functions, so marketing versus HR versus finance, or even vendors that are working with. And we look at another trend that's less to do with, somewhat to do with remote work, is this idea of outsourcing and having flexible and agile organizations by outsourcing pieces of it so that you can bring in those resources as you need. That creates an organizational distance that has to be overcome in order for those teams to work well together. The third is physical distance, and that's what we think about when we think about remote work or virtual. We think about the fact that we're working from different floors in the same building, different buildings on a campus, different regions, different countries. That's what we think about. But that's only one aspect to it, because there's a fourth one then called technological distance, and that's distance that's created as a result of what technology we choose to use, what modality we want, and then how we use it. And that also has an impact on competence and credibility, because different people in different cultures have a preferred technology, introverts, extroverts, different styles, like one over the other. Different capabilities have an impact too, going back to electronic body language. And so one of the things you want to think about is how do you develop that trust? So you have to look at the kinds of distances you overcome and then make a conscious plan to do that. So when you think about virtual team building, you really need to take the time up front to say, let's slow down to speed up, or take time to make time. And we have seen again and again, and our research shows this, that teams that take time up front to get to know each other, to create shared processes in terms of how they're going to communicate, how they're going to make decisions, who has input into that decision, who has the expertise, becomes really important around creating a foundation and a platform. So kind of going back, Mari, to your work on wellness, much of what we do and what we advocate is that you take a wellness rather than triage approach to virtual work. Right. And unfortunately, it's taking a really long time, particularly for larger organizations, to understand that if you can upfront do team building and create some consistency, rather you can exponentially get things done faster, and people don't have to suffer, digitally in a way. And you can really take that wellness approach, and so you're taking you're not having to fix things that are broken, fix relationships, going back to those technologies, fixing the lack of trust. You can really do that from the beginning. So it also takes into account another huge aspect, particularly of remote work, and that's this idea of digital loneliness. And it's the idea of isolation. So if I'm working every day from a home office and several people are at a hub together, I might feel isolated because I don't have access to that. And the challenge that we face, and I think is going to have to be addressed, is that remote work, the ability to work from home, has to be positioned not as a benefit just to the person working remotely, but to the team and the organization. If not, it's, well, Mari gets to work from home, so you know what, she should reach out to me rather than waiting, for me to say, oh, I think Mari needs to know this, or she needs to be included. Let's see if we can get her on quickly and do just a quick ad hoc meeting, like instant meetings they're called on different technologies. Because then the onus for the team is that we all own this. But until we can articulate as a team or as a group the value of allowing somebody to work remote, because it means that they can contribute at 125%, that means there's a have and a have not. And unconsciously, I may be less motivated to have you be included in some of the things that we desperately need your expertise and your voice in, but you also need to be included in. So that aspect in terms of overcoming that is the sense of creating a business case, a team case for the ability for people to work well everywhere.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for addressing those challenges and what it takes to really manage a team in this way. So very important. And I think you're right. So many organizations aren't taking the time to do the planning and thinking through some of these approaches. Stefanie, if our audience wants to learn a little bit more about you and the work that you're doing and your research, where can they find that information?
So much of it is on our website. It is www.bridgingdistance, BRIDGINGDISTANCE.com. And on there, we have research opportunities. We're always looking for people to participate. I think digital loneliness, it looks like that's going to be our 2019 research subject. So if people are interested in being a part of that, electronic focus groups, assessments, different pieces, love to have those voices and contribute to part of this really, really critical global conversation.
Interesting. Well, thank you for making that offer, and thank you so much for being here today. I find this conversation just really interesting, and I know our audience will as well. Stefanie, thanks so much for being here.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Mari.